Greetings, everybody, and thank you for joining us again here on the channel. Thanks so much for your time and love having you here. We love to talk about some of the things that we're very passionate about. We're a family of real estate companies in Austin, Texas. We have a commercial construction company called CADRE Construction, commercial development company called CADRE Development. We also have Kudu Realty Partners, which is our brokerage firm. Our architecture firm is called Bluefin Design, and we own a flooring company called Paramount Company and Floors. I'm Ron Evans, and I'm joined today by my common business partner in all of those companies, Charbel, Dahdah.
Well, thanks for having me, Ron. Excited to be here.
Thanks for being here. I'm glad you're excited to be here. So we've been doing a series of discussions on construction, your expertise. I spent most of my early years, and then, really, 20 plus years in the business in development and brokerage. And you spent right through college and after college, you spent your time doing construction and then kind of came in the development world. So I still rely on you for the expertise in construction. We're going to talk about risk management today. And I think about 80% of our viewers just switch to a different video. Sounds so boring. So we'll try to make it a little more interesting than it would normally be.
And honestly, it's the meat of what we do.
Risk
management is insanely important. It's what makes or breaks deals, makes or breaks companies, makes or breaks, construction projects.
Yeah. Keeps you up at night.
Keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
Sleeping well, knowing we manage.
Yeah.
Knowing we manage it properly. But however, no two projects are alike, no development deal, two development deals are alike. There's always new rules and regulations getting thrown out there, depending on the marketplace. So it's definitely something that needs to be on the forefront of all thinking on development deals.
Well, let's go through at a high level, 8 or so of some of the risk management bullet points that anybody should know exist. There's no way we can go into detail on these each, but let's talk about them from a high level. As an intro to that, though, it just occurred to me, you and I remember, we talked about in the last video, we remember days when people kind of wanted to be their own developer. Excuse me. I've got a piece of land and I don't really want to hire a developer. I'm going to do this myself. And they were a dentist, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, but we've seen it.
Absolutely.
Right? Surely no one says, I'm going to be my own general contractor. They might build their own house. Maybe. But in the commercial world, it just doesn't happen. And in our world, where we built a lot of technical construction, that really doesn't happen. But without somebody like a general contractor, a developer, a team in place, I think people, as they hear these things, are going to say, risk management is not only critically important, but the team that's implementing the risk management is everything.
Good point.
Are you hiring the cheapest architect? Are you hiring the cheapest general contractor? Are you hiring based on cost alone? And if you are you putting yourself exposure under these risk management categories? Right?
Correct.
So let's kind of go through some of them. Very high level at the top. Planning. So regulatory, feasibility, site evaluation. Site evaluation is a really good one to start with. What's risk management have to do with site evaluation?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. We always want to see the proper team partnered up on a proper deal. So let's talk about site acquisition. You've got to know where you want to be. You've done your demographics research. This site in X amount of city has this traffic flow. It's ideal for me. That's great. Awesome. Where we've seen some folks fall short is they go ahead, they put together a contract, whether or not they may have a broker, let's leave it at that for now. They'll put a contract in place and they'll purchase that land. Then we get the phone call. Hey, guess what? Team CADRE, I found a new project or new property in this specific part of town that I think I'm going to kill it at, do wonderful at. Well, great. Our first question to them is, did you hire a civil engineer to help you through this process? We've heard all sorts of answers. We've heard some answers of, well, no, I had an awesome attorney that helped me review the contract.
We have heard that one.
Absolutely. Yep. When they say no, that's when we tend to freak out for them. Their risk has substantially gone up. The reason being is you have to do a proper feasibility study on the land you're acquiring. The question is, well, why? Why do you have to do that? The answer is simple. You need to make sure that property is appropriate for what you're trying to do with it. To say the least, the zoning. Can you build a specific product type on that specific piece of dirt? Some land that you may see right there in the heart of the city may not allow office, may not allow medical, may not allow retail. But just because you assume it's next to or butted next to another retail strip or next to another medical professional park, you assume it could very well change. You could just be outside the city limits, or you could be inside the city limits, and there's different jurisdictions that go with that. But the biggest risk with planning on the site acquisition standpoint is not conducting a proper feasibility study with the right players, including the civil engineering and a developer that has done this from a time or two.
So there's financial feasibility, right? That's early on. In addition, and that very often overlaps with the site.
Correct.
Because you might love a site, but you might have so much cut and fill. So in layman's terms, bad dirt going out, good dirt coming in.
Exactly.
It could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you don't know that in advance, that's a budget killer.
Exactly.
And we could list 50 of those in probably 30 seconds, right? So you're doing feasibility or risk management on the site, on your budget, up front, well in advance of even beginning to sign contracts with the people that are on your team.
Exactly.
Okay. So then that's the segue. Let's talk about contracts. Who are you hiring up front, and how do you manage your risk in those hires that qualify these people? Make sure using an attorney. Kind of help us through that. Who's coming in early in the process?
Yeah, as you're negotiating the land, just before you close on it, you're reviewing your purchase agreements, your land contract. Excuse me. You also need to hire your civil engineer, as we talked about. Assuming you have a great attorney, not only a great attorney that does personal injury, you want an attorney that specializes in real estate law. Those are very, very valuable because they'll understand how this contract's supposed to be written. Where a personal injury attorney who may be a great, amazing attorney like the Thomas J. Henrys of the world, I don't know, they may not have the experience that you need to mitigate your risk on this specific land contract. Because once you go and tie into a contract, you are legally binding to close on this deal. If you somehow figure out a way that is going to keep you from closing on the deal, you could lose tons of money on it. So that's a huge risk standpoint right there.
Remember the baseball training facility over in West Austin that we helped propose? So we literally had a buyer who had to jump to get a piece of land he really wanted. And
it's a great deal.
Great. He was passionate about this facility because his kids played baseball. He bought the land for cash. Turns out he couldn't build the facility he wanted, at all. He could not build on it. He had to turn around and sell it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So a big loss for him there. It stinks. We hate to hear that. But when we get these late calls of I've already purchased my land or I'm already under contract, those are the first questions we're going to ask. So shame on you if you have not hired a real estate attorney and a civil engineer up front.
Thanks for shaming our audience. Yeah. And look, hold on. So there's a middle ground there. We don't want to hear that I already bought it. We're less troubled if they say I'm under contract, and hopefully they have a good feasibility period.
Exactly.
How much time in that feasibility for a raw? Look, we build finish outs. Someone comes to us and says, build us a dental office in this strip center. It's 4,000 feet. This doesn't really apply as much because we're talking about site selection. How much time would be normally needed in a feasibility on a contract for us to help do our thing?
How much time would we need?
Or would they need to evaluate the site?
Yeah.
Not a week.
No, not a week. We want as much time as possible before your money goes hard or before you have to extend. So, try to get the 60 days, the 90 days if you can. Okay. And then negotiate, obviously, the option periods and how much that's going to cost to extend.
Okay. Yeah. So we're kind of acting as the architect. No, that's not the good word. Sorry. The conductor of the symphony. So we're bringing in a civil to do his thing. Often we're bringing in an architect to do a little bit. There's not a lot they do in that feasibility planning to manage the risk. They might want to see the plan. It's never a bad idea to involve them.
Correct.
But it's really the civil engineer who's doing that stuff up front. You might be doing a geotechnical, so you're checking the soils. It's good to know that in advance. You certainly are meeting with the city, right?
Exactly. And that's the beauty of also bringing the architect on board in addition to the civil engineer. When we're conducting these pre-development meetings with the city, and every city is going to have their individual rules and regs, and their standpoints on this specific piece of property and how they want to do things. But it's great to have as many professionals in that room as possible, so you're asking the right questions that's going to yield the most and the highest and best square footage on that property for that end user.
Okay. There's risk associated with delays. Let me rephrase that. There's risk associated with schedule.
Absolutely.
Right. So you might have a lease that's expiring and you're going to be stuck in 150% holdover rent for 6 months. So analyzing what might happen if we get 4 months of straight rain in the spring and the project is delayed by, a considerable amount of time. So there is risk associated with it. How do we manage those risks of scheduling and delays? Because acts of God are acts of God, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The short answer is give yourself as much runway as possible. You want to avoid the holdover rents because nobody can afford that. You went out and you got a lease based on this X dollar amount. Now it's going to be increased, additional 50% month to month. There's a lot of risk. That's if you have the option of extending.
Right.
Some end users who have waited too long to pull the trigger on this development deal or a development deal now find themselves in a huge pickle. They can't extend. And it's impossible to get this construction minimized to something that's unreasonable. So everybody's going to fail at that point. So give yourself as much runway as possible. Mitigate timing and schedule impacts by having the right team in place early on that can put together a very accurate set of plans. Ideally, you've already done the pre-development meetings with the city. The rules and regs. What they're looking for. What they should and we should all avoid. When those drawings go into play for review, it will be a much shorter timeline. It's not unheard of to be in the permit phase for over 12 months.
Sure.
So, 2 years in advance before you have to move out of your location, sometimes 3 years in advance. Keep that in mind. Give yourself as much runway to start that process.
We've had projects that have been 2 to 3 years in planning. That doesn't mean it took that long to get the permit, but there's a lot involved in some of these projects.
Correct.
So that's a good segue to regulatory. So you've got very often, we've mentioned this in fact, in the last video that we recorded together, we mentioned the regulatory process of going to TCEQ, which is our environmental commission here in Texas. Often the county, roadways, whether it's tollway authorities or Texas Department of Transportation, cities for permitting. How do you manage the risk of taking your project through so many different agencies and all the curveballs they can throw you?
That's a tough one. The curveballs is...
Please give us the answer. Oh, wise one.
I don't think anybody has the answers other than employing a very well-equipped professional team that understands and has been through multiple TCEQ review sessions, understands their rules and regs and guidelines, amongst all the other AHJs, authorities having jurisdictions. You really want to get a solid team and give them ample time to put together these proper drawings. If they've got 2 weeks to put together a set of drawings, I guarantee you those sets of drawings will come back redlined.
Sure.
And you're not only upset the city, in most cities that we run into, they're working with limited resources. Unfortunately, COVID has changed a lot of things and a lot of mindsets. But one of them is a lot of these cities do not have the resources they need to properly get your drawings out off the review desk in a short amount of time. It's taken longer and longer, and there's more comments that come in. But the cleaner sets you can supply them, the better off you are up front.
Yeah. So and I hate to be the doomsdayer, but they always say it's pretty tough to fight City Hall. Right. And we've learned in projects, it's a risk that you often know you can only mitigate, but you can't avoid. We've had projects before where the city has thrown us curveballs that legally they're not even supposed to be able to do. Right. You remember the water line to nowhere that we had to build on a project one time. And we were about to move our tenants in, and we would have won that fight. But it would have taken 2 or 3 years and killed our project. So we just ponied up the cash and put the water line in. And it was not on our plans.
Correct.
So I think everybody needs to go into this with, hope for the best, plan for the worst. And that's the contingencies.
Absolutely.
That's putting those contingencies in your timeline and your budget.
Exactly.
So you're going to have to manage. You're right. It's a great team to get through this. It's experience. It's people who've been there and done this many, many times. And that architect who really understands the code, that civil engineer who really knows how to get a site permit, the builder who really can navigate you through these surprises and delays and budget surprises.
Correct.
So how about insurance coverages? Who's carrying the insurance? Let's say we're hired to build a surgery center for a plastic surgeon, and it's 15,000 square feet. So we start from the very, very beginning. We're building it. We're feed developing this thing. We're bringing it. We're turning the raw dirt into a developable site and a buildable site, and then we're going to build the building. Who's carrying the insurance?
Everybody, simply stated, everybody is. On a general contractor standpoint, that GC has to have what we call PNC, property and casual insurance, combination of general liability as well as builder's risk. So during the construction process, the general contractor has to have some strong insurance policies put in place. Not all general contractors have strong policies. Some have terrible insurance ratings where their insurance coverage and premiums are sky high through the roof. And those injuries that they've had in the past are going to cost you money because they'll pass that cost down to you.
How would the client know that?
It's a good question. So the analyzing, simply put, ask for their safety ratings.
Okay.
And have the insurance company provide you or them, that gets passed along to you, their insurance rating. So
do you think most clients do that?
I don't think so.
I don't either.
Unless it's a sophisticated client that we've worked with who has a professional construction management team put in place, they don't really know to ask that question.
But listen up, boys and girls.
Which is a huge one, and that'll tell you, how safe and what the general contractor's safety procedures are, and how strict they adhere to their own policies. Okay. Any injuries, incidents will adjust their rating, kind of like a credit score, if you will. You default on a loan, your credit score gets severely dropped, similar in the insurance world. So with that said, you obviously will carry liability before a general contractor comes into place. Somebody walks on your land. You need to make sure you have a policy put in place there. And of course, your architecture teams, your civil engineering teams, they're going to have their own professional liability as well. So make sure you get a copy of that. What's simply put called errors and omissions insurance. God forbid you ever have to employ that or deploy that, but you want to make sure that your team has the proper insurance. Past that, you're under construction phase. All the subcontractors have to have their own insurance policies and workers' comp, all the legal and insurance coverage that you're required to have. You may not know what it is.
How do we
Your attorney
make sure
may
that
not know what it is. Relying on the right group, the right professional group that has all that in place.
So as a general contractor on a job, we go out and we get those verifications of insurance from our subs.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right. So what about quality control? So talk to me a little bit about, not necessarily only during construction, it can be before construction, but primarily during construction. What are the quality control? I'm going to get that right in a minute. Risk management that happens as it's being built. Things can happen during construction. Things do happen during construction. How do you manage the risk of cost overruns, unforeseen delays, something happening that was not in line with the expectations of the owner? Talk to me about some of the risk mitigation during that process.
Oh boy, that could vary from anything to anything right there. But construction is it's a dynamic world, to say the least. Materials, you could have long lead time, so mitigating that, ordering things up front as early as possible. Really having a thorough submittal process with your general contractor, and make sure what they're providing you has been already approved.
What's a submittal?
So a submittal is it's a process that we go through that approves all the nuts and bolts and pieces, anything and all, whether it's a mechanical unit down to paint finish. We put together basically an example of what is about to be installed in the building. It could come with all sorts of specs and manuals and project manuals that are associated with it, but it's an approval process that checks and double checks what the architect designed, what the civil engineer designed, the structural engineer design is going to be approved and truly applies to what we're actually building.
Okay.
So during the design phase, you may like the color blue. Well, then by the time this thing gets fully designed, the contractor's about to paint that color blue on the wall. They will provide you that color blue one last time. Make sure you really like it. If it's approved, awesome. Then it gets approved, and we'll go ahead and do that. Now, that's a simple example. Structural engineering, we'll put together structural shop drawings, every nut and bolt, every square inch of structural steel that's going to be installed, the size, the thickness, how it gets welded. So it becomes very elaborate, very technical, very scientific. So everything that gets built inside that facility will have been approved multiple times before it actually goes installed.
So you're mitigating the risk of something in the real world being built and it's not what you were expecting.
Exactly. We've caught, not with our architecture firm, but we've caught with some others that there's been copy and paste in specs. Maybe some architects use the same spec book, they'll copy and paste it. They're human. They may have left out something or maybe carried something over that wasn't applicable to this project. Had there not been a submittal process, that blue may have been green and you wouldn't have not known it until it's too late. And then now it costs somebody money, whether it's you or the architect or the contractor to fix it.
What about communication with say the client? I mean, there's tons of communication that goes on, but we talked in our previous video about owner, architect, contractor meetings. Is that a form of risk mitigation?
Absolutely. We're firm believers in over communicating. You cannot communicate enough. And you absolutely have to be as transparent as possible with your team. And then that's not only the ownership group, but with the architecture group, the civil group, the structural group, the subcontractors. We all need to be honest of what the schedule expectations are, what the delivery of the schedule actually will be. We all need to be transparent about the budget, what is allowed in the budget, what's considered an allowance, what's considered contingency, how all that is spent. Those are, at a minimum, a weekly discussion, if not a daily discussion. So what we do is we conduct what's called owner architect contractor meetings. Typically, they're either once a week or they're once every other week throughout the whole life of the construction process. Okay. And that's just during the construction process. We have regular communications before we break ground as well on the pre-development route.
Okay. So safety management, I know, is always a huge topic of conversation and attention and focus in our company. Any good contractor should be super focused on that because you can imagine the kind of problems we get into when we have an incident. How do we mitigate the risk of injuries and on our site?
Exactly. So there's minimum guidelines that OSHA puts together. We've all heard the words OSHA or the acronym OSHA. They'll have a minimum guideline of what needs to happen before it actually gets installed. So for example, OSHA is going to require a certain type of scaffolding for the mason. But that's just the bare minimum. We have our own policies put in place. We have our own safety procedures. Everybody in our organization is OSHA 10 or OSHA 30, depending on their specific role, certified. That means they've been through these excruciating OSHA programs that show you what typically gets folks hurt. And of course, you can't replace a life. That's one thing we will not cut short by any means, and we won't allow anybody else to cut short by any means. Is safety has to be an utmost importance. We have our folks that conduct our safety programs. We have to adhere to our insurance requirements as well to keep our great insurance ratings. We have to have 0 incidents and 0 injuries, and so far today we have 0 incidents and 0 injuries. Yeah. So it's definitely a serious role that everybody has to take place.
Okay. Yeah. What about the dreaded change order? Everybody, it's like a cuss word, right, in our industry, but they happen. And very often they're not, hopefully it's not a general contractor trying to slide one over on you, but we know that happens. A lot of general contractors, try to make additional profit by identifying scope gaps and, things that are not covered in those plans they bid. And then later on, I'm going to change order you for that. And it's more money in their pocket. Let's don't go there, even though I just did. Let's go to change orders that the client changes his mind and says he wants to upgrade something, or the city comes out and, identify something that needs to be done that's not in the plans. How can an owner mitigate the risk of that getting out of hand?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Change orders is essentially a derogatory term in our industry. Nobody likes change orders. So for those that don't know what that is, a change order it's the mechanism by contract that changes the cost of the work. So let's say you have your general contractor under a $5 million contract. You decide, or somebody decides, hey, we want to add 10,000 square feet of extra concrete. Well, there's a cost associated with that. It wasn't on the plan set originally. It wasn't anticipated by any means in the estimate, and it wasn't clarified. So there's a cost associated with that. And the only way to modify the contract amount is by an official change order document.
Okay.
Nobody likes it. Nobody wins in a change order. They're very inefficient. When we typically have changes, essentially a scope of work change, it does slow down the process. It does slow down the subcontractors. It can push your timeline out. So we want to mitigate that as much as possible. The one way to mitigate it is when you hire your general contractor early on or upfront throughout the design phase, they also help eliminate what we call scope gaps in the drawings. They're scrubbing these drawings with you, making sure we didn't leave these bolts out of the, this doohickey and that doohickey. I give so many different examples.
Term, right?
Absolutely. There's so many opportunities that have not been thoroughly vetted that ultimately become what we call a change order opportunity for somebody, whether it's subcontractor and so on. So we want to mitigate that as much as possible. Before we process any change orders with our clients, we have to make sure we have all the backup associated with it, that our subcontractors have their backup from their vendors. We want to see what the real price that they're actually paying. Is it merited? Is it reasonable? Is it fair? Is it ethical? There's business decisions that do come with that. But essentially speaking, nobody likes change orders. Now they can go for the positive or the negative. It's also on the flip side. If we're reducing scope, the owner's entitled to a credit as well.
So it goes both ways.
Absolutely. A lot of our contracts we put in is what we consider a savings clause. So when we sign up front with an owner internally, if things go better than planned, if we're able to buy out subs better than anticipated, there's a savings there. The GC doesn't keep all that savings in this capacity. We want to incentivize our design team and our ownership group. If we can shave off a day off the construction, or if we can minimize your cost, then there's a savings that we'll both participate in. So at the end of the day, if we do come in under budget, both people are winning, or both parties are winning.
And in that change order process, we reiterate here, it's not necessarily you gave the blue-green paint example earlier. The paint could go up on the wall and the client could just say, I know this is going to cost me money, but I don't like it.
Exactly.
I need to change that blue to green. Mm-hmm. And so hopefully with us, this is true with the general contractor, that's predetermined in their GC agreement, how change orders are going to be handled.
Exactly. Correct? So there's a process there, not only on the timelines, but what percentage of overhead and profit you could associate with it, not only in the general contractor standpoint, but also the subcontractor standpoint.
So they make the decision to change the blue to green. There's a process outlined in the agreement that was signed. We use typically AIA agreements, Architectural Institute of America.
Yeah, American Institute of Architects puts together.
I said that completely wrong, didn't I?
That's all good.
I've switched
it's
my
Monday.
It's
Monday. Yeah. So the American Institute of Architects, essentially years and years ago, generated these documents under different agreements and for different parties, but we use what's called the AIA formats. It's stamped on their letterhead and all. We have to pay the AIA to get these agreements, and it spells out everything you can think of during the construction process, change orders included.
And that's something we kind of skipped way at the top of this conversation, but I'll just throw it in just to kind of for a little catch-all here. That's a form of risk mitigation itself, a good contract, AIA contract. That's why we encourage our clients to use attorneys. Mm-hmm. That's why it's important that
construction attorneys. Yeah.
Well, real estate attorney for the real estate acquisition, construction attorney to review this AIA contract. Not the attorney you use to get your divorce, right? The contract that you have with your architect and your civil engineer, and will help mitigate the issues with the risk issues there, because we've read many contracts. Very often a client of ours has never hired a civil engineer.
Correct.
They need somebody to look over their shoulder. So the contracts involved are very much a significant part of mitigating the risk in this process.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, there's more we could talk about, I'm sure. Hopefully this gives everybody a good overview. Anything you can think of we missed that you want to hit?
Oh gosh, I could sit here for days talking about all this. No, I mean, simply put, I think the best, because it is scary. You know, you're depending on the type of end user you are and what your if this is your first time, you're essentially putting in a portion of your life savings, and you're trusting somebody else to do with that money properly and do it right. Hire the best professionals you can think of. You know, yes, they need to be competitive. The least or the most cheapest contractor or most cheapest civil engineer is not going to typically be the best one, but just make sure they're competitive, vet everything out properly, make sure you've got the right team in place. If you're not the professional, then hire the right professional. It's well worth it. We've all done our own versions of DIY, and I think we've all learned our lesson on why we shouldn't do that again, or we've heard horror stories. Don't be that horror story. Hire the right professional. And any questions you have for us, we're here on standby.
For sure.
Whether we're your team or not, we can point you in the right direction.
Yeah, it's so tempting. You just almost can't keep yourself from taking that lowest cost provider. You might, get 5 bids for whatever, widgets, doohickeys, and 4 of them are about the same and one of them's 30% cheaper. It's so tempting to go with that 30% cheaper because you say, think of all the money I could save.
Exactly.
But we all know in our gut, if it's too good to be true, probably isn't. And that's why I think it's so important for people to realize it's not just that you may not get what you were promised cost-wise, but you're exposing yourself to risk. You really are. And that's what we're trying to help people avoid.
Yep, absolutely. You can't get time back. So make sure you utilize that to the best of your knowledge.
Cool. Charbel, thanks.
Thank you.
Great conversation. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We love doing these videos for you, and I hope that you've gotten something out of it. Please reach out to us in the comments and ask some questions. We'll keep an eye on that, or reach out to us through our website. Love to talk to you more about your project. Like Charbel said, we're always willing to help people along, even if we're not the team that you hire. We just love giving you advice. We kind of build in the Texas and Southwest regions. If you're in New York and you got a question for us, we're happy to be a resource for you. So look us up and reach out with your questions. Thanks and have a great day. Thanks, Charbel.
Thank you.
See ya.